Hi everyone. Today video is on Identity Server 4. So Identity Server 4 using client credential. Today we are going to do a demo to protect a web API using the client credentials. Okay. So in this video we are going to implement IClientStore and IResourceStore. What they are we are going to understand in the upcoming steps. Okay. So this demo is on Identity Server 4 client credentials for protecting the resource. Okay. So what is client credential flow? Client credential flow is suitable internal communication between that applications. So in this flow, applications request identity server JWT access token to consume the protected APIs. So actually, client credentials what for means it's not like a user authentication where user can enter username and password. It is not like that. It is authentication between applications like a console application or a desktop application or a mobile application can try to consume some secured API. Okay, to consume that secured API, these client applications should have the JWT authentication token. Okay, that can be delivered by the identity server. Okay, so that is the small definition regarding this client credentials. Okay. So let's see the flow of client credentials. So here you can see identity servers, right? And here you can see clients, like any client, like a console application, desktop application, or API. Anything can be a client, okay? And here you can see API resources. So these are nothing but the protected resources by this identity server. That means if anyone want to consume these API resources, they need to have the JWT token that was provided by the identity server. Okay. So if you see the flow here, client what they will do, they will provide some credentials. Okay. So every client will have credentials. These credentials also given by this identity server because it will store this client credential information inside of identity DB database. Okay, so client applications what they do, they will send a client ID, client secret, and scope. Scope is nothing but a permission to access the particular protected API. Okay, so this scope is optional to send from the client because I have mentioned right already client database will contains all the information, sorry, identity database will contain all the information regarding the every client. Okay, only registered clients only can request for the JWT access token. So if you don't send scope also, identity server can manage to retrieve the scopes that are resides inside of its DB. Okay, so clients what they will do, they will send client ID, client secret, and optional scopes to the identity server. So identity server what it will do, it will validate the client ID secret, okay, against its database. If that is a valid request, then identity server will send the JWT access token to the client. Okay. So on receiving secured JWT access token, now client application can consume the secured APIs. Okay. So client what they will do, they will send the JWT access token to the protected API resources. So they will validate the JWT token, and if they are successfully valid, API will respond with the proper API response. Okay, so that is the flow. Here, two things we have to remember. All the clients which they request for JWT token must be registered in identity server. That is one point. And all the protected resources, okay, what they identity server protecting, everything should be registered as a scopes in this identity server database. Okay, that is second point. Okay, so this is how flow works. So let's take the steps. So these are the steps for this flow. Okay, so let's read them. So client credential flow requires client ID and client secret for authentication. Sorry, we know client ID, client secret must be required for the authentication, a client credential flow. So clients are applications that want to consume the protected API by the identity server. So this point mentioned that these are all the protected APIs by the identity server, and client want to consume them. Okay. So each client should register with identity server. I have mentioned, right? Identity server know about their client. So these clients must be registered. Okay. Every client will have their unique client ID and client secret. Okay. So identity server stores the client information like client ID, unique identifier, and client secrets and scopes, etc. Okay. So to register a client, identity server, what it will do, it will store the information about the client like client ID, client secret, and scope. Okay. So client using client ID and client secret and scope is an optional, can request the identity server as a trusted client to get the JW token. So client, what they can do, they can send its client ID and client secret and scope, that is optional, to the identity server, and can request for the secured JWT access token. Okay. So protected APIs are registered under the identity servers as the API resources with set of scopes. Okay. So these APIs, each one is like a one resource. So each resource permission is available as a scope. So API resource name and scope permission will be stored in the identity auth server. Okay. So any client to access the product API, okay, then client scope should match with the scopes with the API resources. Okay. So any client to consume this protected resource, I have mentioned, right, it have scopes and it will store. So those scopes must be matched with the client scopes. That means this client have permission to consume that particular API resource. Okay. So the JW token contains those scope information that can be used by protected API as a authorization claim. So protected API internally can create an authorization and where they can use the scope value as a claim to protect themselves. Okay. So those are the steps uh, regarding the authorization. Okay. So generally identity server supports a lot of different type of authentications like password based authentication. Our client current video is client credential authentication, like implicit authentication. Okay. Like authorization code authentication, lot of different types out there. Okay. So based on the each type, our table structure will be vary, not vary, increases. Okay. Everything will have common, but a few authentication may need few more additional tables. Okay. Let's check the table structure, how we have to create for this demo. Okay. So this is the my database design. Here you can see on top client. Okay. So client is a parent table here. So what it will contain, here I am not showing full uh, all columns. I am just showing particular important columns, like couple of them. Okay. So ID, it's a primary key and client ID. Okay. This is the unique identifier for the client ID. Okay. So now client ID will have a child tables like client grants, client scopes, and client secrets. So let's check what are they. Client grant types. Grant types are nothing but the authentication types. A client can have n number of authentication, like our current video is on client credential authentication. It can also have authorization code authentication, or it can have implicit flow authentication. Okay, like that. Each authentication type we can call as client grant type. So they will be registered here. So here we will have grant type means authentication name, and client ID is nothing but this primary key ID we will store here. Okay. So these names look similar, but in child table, what we will do, instead of saving that client ID directly, what we will do, we will store the ID. Okay, primary key. Next, scopes. Scopes are like permissions that are assigned to the our client. Okay, so here also like a scope name and client ID, ID nothing but primary key, and a client secret. Client secret I have already mentioned, right? Client ID and client secret, those are like, so client can have collection of secrets. Okay, so they can be loaded from this table. Okay, that's about the client structure. Coming to this one, these are like API resources. Okay, so here API resource means it's like a name of the particular API. Okay, and scope means like permission on the API. Okay, so this API resource can be used inside of the API scopes like a namespace to separate the scopes. For suppose we will have a read permission, right? For suppose we have a scope like read and write. Okay, to separate them more effectively, what we can do, we can add a namespace. Something like if I have a API resource like API one, so what I can create scope means API one dot read, API one dot write. So it will give name scopes. Okay. So here one more thing we have to understand is API resource is optional. Okay. If you don't have this table also fine. But API scopes must be mandatory because identity server matches the scope name, okay, in the client scope table with the name of the scope in the API resource scope table. Okay, so either you can use single API resource scope or you can use both. Okay, so you cannot sustain with only API resource table. It should must depends upon API resource scope. Okay, so that's about the table structure. So first, let's jump into create our sample project. Okay. Okay. Now I am using Visual Studio 2019. So what you can do means you can search like identity. Okay. Here you can see like different templates that are available like empty admin UI with Microsoft .NET Core Identity with the NT Framework Core Store with the in-memory store and test users. Okay. So I think around 5 templates are available with the identity server. So for our demo, what I will select the identity server for empty template. Okay. So let me select my project path. Okay, I have selected my path, and what I will do, I will name a project like. So first I'm creating identity template, right? So what I will do, identity for dot demo API. Okay. So here what I will do, identity for identity server, I will name like identity server for demo as a solution. So let me create that project. Okay, our identity project has been successfully created. You can see the packages like identity server 4 and some Serilog package that are we are having as a packages. Okay, first step is let's create our tables. Okay, tables and their classes. So I have already created my tables and I also dumped some test data into them. Okay, for you, I can show you the script so you can pause the video and you can create that, like you can execute that query into your local system so you can follow my steps. Okay, so let's first add the client client table. Okay, so here is the client table structure. So what I am having here, so if you observe sorry, ID that is integer and identity means that is a primary key. And client ID, I am storing some character value and client name. So this is like a display name, nothing much importance it will have. Okay. And some primary key constraint I have added. And here also showing the command to insert some dummy data. So here my client ID is my client. Okay. My client name is my space client. Okay, you can run this command. Okay, so now what I will do, I will create a class for this table. Okay, now in our project, what we will do, let's create a folder like data. And inside of data, let's add folder like entities. Okay. So client, okay, what are we are having? Public int ID. This is a unique identifier value. Next, public string client ID. Okay, and public string client name. Okay, these are my client table columns. Okay, let's remove unused namespaces. Next, we are going to create a client table, child table, that is client grants. Okay, so here is table like ID, identity for this client grant types table. Okay, and client ID, that is our primary key in the client table, which is integer. So if you want, you can add it as a foreign key constraint. I am not big fan of that, so I am simply using that column directly without any foreign key constraint. If you want, you can add. And grant type varchar. Okay, here you need to specify the grant types. So those are only fixed 5 grant types. Okay, maximum a client can have. Okay, so exactly those constant names only we have to add. Okay, then only framework can recognize. You cannot add anything. Okay, and some constraint. Here you can see some dummy data. So for the client ID 1, for the client table primary key ID 1, here we are inserting as a reference, and here see client underscore client credentials. This is the constant string value for the client credentials. Okay, this is the default understandable keyword. Okay, by the identity server framework. Okay, you should insert like this only, this value. Okay, so let's create the table for it, class for it in our project. Okay, class client grant types. Okay, public int id. Okay, public string grant type, and public int client id, client table unique identifier. Okay, now let's add one more client table, child table. Okay, next we are going to add is client secrets. Okay, so here also id primary key value for this table, and client id into value, that is our client table unique id, that is id column value, and secrets, which is a character. You can add any secret value. Okay, so here I am inserting some dummy data for the client of the client table record 1. Okay, so let's create a class for this table. Okay, these are the client secrets. So till now we have three table classes we add, and for our client table there is one more child class. Let's add them now. So final child table for our client is client scopes. So here also ID, client ID, and scope, some constraint, and some scope. So here you can see some scope value, API1 dot read, right? Those are like permissions. These scopes are nothing but. Okay, so let's create a class for it. Okay, we are done with creating classes for our client table, and we need to create two more. One is like API resource, and another one is like uh, API scope. Okay, so this is our API resource table script. So here also ID name. This is the resource protecting name. Okay, so here there is one importance for this name. I have mentioned you can use API resource and API scopes as a combined thing, or else API scopes only. If you use API scopes only, then our JWT token, which was generated by the identity server, will have audience claim, AUD claim. Okay, audience means for which API this JW token is valid. So like, that is the original meaning of audience. Okay. So only API scopes you use, you won't have a audience value. Okay. To get some good audience value, that is something like a resource name, you must use API resource table. That is the reason I am using API resource table as well. If you don't want, you can absolutely don't, no need to use this table. And you need to do one more thing is like in our protected API, while configuring JWT service, you need to disable the validating the audience. Okay. So that step I will show when we enter into creating our API, our protecting API resource. Okay. So for now, let's create class for this API resources. Okay, so this is our API resource class. So, and finally, we need to create one more table class. Okay, that is API resource scopes. So here what we'll have ID value, which is a primary key, and scope, name of the scope, and API resource ID. So this is the primary key of the API resource table. Okay, and some sample data. Okay. So if you observe here, our scope value is like ap1 dot read. That nothing but the namespace API1 taken from API resource. Here you can see name of the API resource. Okay. So let's create a class for it. Okay. We have successfully created all our table class, and it is not mandatory to use tables only. All these things you can simply load from a constant class and configure them. Okay, what that means, if you are protecting very few APIs and those will be consumed by very few clients. Okay, at that time, if you observe, we have a class like config.cs file which is generated by default when our project is created. If you go there, you can see all API scope clients, and you can configure the API resources here. Okay, all things you can configure here as a static method. So what you can do, these static methods can be registered in the startup for the in-memory application in memory. So if you go to startup, I think by default they provide us, see here, in-memory clients and in-memory scopes and in-memory identity resources. Okay, so you can use this in-memory if you are dealing with the very few APIs if you are protecting and a very few clients if your identity server is consuming. Okay, then please go for like a static method way only. Don't create all these tables and everything. Okay, but if your identity server is a parent for lot of applications, means lot of applications are depending upon authentication for this app only. In that case, okay, or you can provide uh, social authentication very easily to a number of different applications using single domain URL. Okay, in that case also you can go for identity server. Okay, so in those cases only go and create tables, or else if you are very absolutely few like 10 or 15, you can, if they are maintainable as a constant, then go for constant. Okay, so constant is very easy. There is no configuration needed. With the basic setup what they have given, that is enough. Only need to do is you need to dump here some constant data. That's it, your app runs. Okay, so but our demo is about loading the data from the database, right? So that's why we are going to implement IClientStore and IResourceStore. So IClientStore loads all client configuration. Okay, that means client table information. IResourceStore loads all resources information like API resource, like API scope. Okay, I hope you understand. So for our demo, we are not going to use these in-memory values. You can comment out them. Okay, so here you have. So before implementing iStore and iClientStore, let's also configure database context like entity framework integration, everything into our application. Okay, so let's install plugin like EF Core. Okay, and uh, SQL Server EF Core plugin. Okay, so let's install both the plugins now. So go to Package Manager and Manage Console. Browse. Okay, entity. So entity framework core. Go for stable version, that is 5.0.8. Install it. Okay, let's accept it and accept. So I hope it is installed successfully. Okay, now we need to install SQL Server also. Here only it is there. Entity framework core.sql server. Okay, let's install it as well. Okay, let's install it. Stable version. Okay, accept it. Okay, I hope both plugins installed successfully. Okay, now what I will do, I will create a context class that is in data folder. Okay, so that is auth db context. Okay, now let's inherit db context. Okay, db context options. Auth db context options. These are DB context options get injected from the startup where we are going to register some default configuration like constraint, consisting like that settings. Okay, so pass it to the base, that is nothing but DB context. Okay, now register all our table classes using DB set. Okay, that's about our DB context. Let's register it in the startup. Okay, so in the startup, you can use build service dot add DB context of type path DB context. Okay, path dot use SQL server. Let's import the namespace. Okay, here you can give the constant string. To do that, here we need to access the settings. Okay, we are going to create a JSON file. So to read them, we need to have property like public I configuration. Okay, that's loads from Microsoft extension dot configurations. Okay, I configuration assign the values configuration. Okay, now I can use that configuration dot get connection string. I have to pass here JSON property value. So let me create a file like app settings.json. JSON file. So I will use name like app settings.development.json file. Okay. So here let me add my connection string. Okay. Now copy this auth demo DB connection property and pass it over here. Okay. That's it. We are done with our DB settings. Okay. Now we need to load from the database our client and API resources when the user requests. Okay. So let's understand what is IClientStore. Why we should implement it. Okay. So IClientStore, what is means identity server provides client. Okay, clients of type identity server for models.client. So this is the client identity server reads generally. It's type of the client. Okay, this client type contains properties to configure our clients. Okay, if our identity server application is used by very few client applications, then we can write all the configuration inside some static method and then registered in the add in memory client method in the startup. So this we have already discussed. Okay. So what that means, if our application is very small, consumed our identity application is consumed by very small amount, small applications, less number of applications, then what you can do, you can create here. So here you can see every type model that loads from identity server 4.models.client. To hover on scopes, identity server 4.model.scope. So from that namespace, it has defined some types. Okay. So if we register these types in startup where we have commented out in memory, so this way we can do if our identity server is consumed by very less applications. Okay. But if we have more number of clients depends upon identity server. Okay. Then it's an obvious good choice to load the all the data from the database. So to retrieve from the database, we have to implement the client store. Okay, and that need to be registered in add client store. See here name also while registration. If you are using in memory, it should use like add in memory clients for registering the client. If we are going to use IClientStore, we have to use the add client store of type or client. Okay. So IClientStore, what will happen means when a request comes to the uh, our identity server, if we implement IClientStore, the framework automatically invokes a method inside of that class which implements IClientStore. So it can retrieve the filter the client from the database. Okay. So that is the use of IClientStore. Okay. So let's implement the IClientStore. So what I will do, I will create a folder like core. Okay. Inside of it, let me add a class like client store that will implement IClientStore. Okay. Client store. Okay. This is the class. Now what I have to do means I client store. I need to implement it. Okay. I have to implement a methods inside of this interface. So this is the method gets executed automatically when the request arrives to the our identity server. So this request will input client ID as its values. So what I can do, I can inject my DB context. So auth DB context. So now what I will do, I can fetch the data from the database using the client ID. So what I can do, where client equal to await async await. Okay, client ID. Okay, dot first dot default async. So now if no client found, okay, in the database, that means invalid client ID was sent as a request, then simply return empty client object, that is ID. So don't confuse with our table client and identity server. Identity server client loads from IdentityServer4 models namespace. To avoid confusion, I will write like DB client is loaded from DB. Okay, so return empty client object. So if client exists, then we need to load dependencies like let's first load grants, DB grants. Okay, await what client, that's where client ID equal to DB client dot ID dot to list async. Okay, so these are collections. Next, after grants, I can retrieve client scopes. Okay, await AuthDB client scopes where client ID equal to db client dot ID dot to list async. Okay, secrets equal to await AuthDB context client ID equal to db client dot ID. Okay, in real world scenario, So if you want to gain some performance benefit, instead of using NT framework core, you can use Tapper, where with single query we can get multiple result sets. It's just like work like ADO.NET, where you can give multiple result sets. Okay, it's your choice. If you want to go with NT framework, that's absolutely fine. So we have loaded all things. Let's prepare the client object. Okay, so it's main things for our client credentials. Client ID is required, that is db client dot client ID, and the client name. You want, you can give. Next thing, let's give client secrets. Okay, so client secrets is a collection of secret objects. So that means it should be encoded string. Okay, should be written. So what I will do, I will secrets count greater than. Then what I will do, so let's use some spaces. Secrets dot select. Okay, new secret. This secret is identity server instance model. If you want, you can pick the definition here. So this is identity server model secret class. Okay, I am preparing that object from the my collection object. Okay, here what I can do, I can pass my secrets and I can encrypt them with SHA-256. Okay, now we can pass that list value. Okay, if no data, I'll simply return null. Okay. Next, let me load grant types. So allowed grant types. This is a collection of strings, I believe. Yes. So here what I will do. Here also use a DB script. DB secrets. Okay. And here I can do grants. Okay. Greater than 0. Then DB grants select our grant type and to list. Okay. Else you can return null. Next thing is scopes. Allowed scope. I think this is also a collection of strings. I believe this type. Yes. So what I can do, IClientScopes dot count to list. Okay, that's all. Those are the required things, but there are lot more properties for the client. So these values are other different authentications. Okay, so for them we may have to add few more child tables for the client table. Okay, for now these are enough. So we are good with the client. So what we are doing, we are implemented the find by client ID async and loading all client data. Okay, so now let's register it. Okay, so to register the client scope, go to startup here. So extend it, add client store, and here I can pass my class that implemented store. Okay, that's it. So I'm done with client store. Now we need to register the IResourceStore. So what is IResourceStore? Okay, so to protect a API, we have to maintain scopes at the identity server. This point we have already discussed. Identity server provides scope type like identity for models.api scope and identity for model.api resources. So these two types of models are provided for the scopes. So either we can register only scopes, that means API scope type only using API scope, or we can use both. I have mentioned right, either we can use only API scope or we have to use both API and API resource. Okay. So if we have only few APIs to protect, then we can write all configurations inside of the some static method that I have already shown, and then register with add in memory API scope. Okay. So every type will have its own in memory type. Okay. Extension method provided by the identity server. So if you use API resources, then we need to register one more additional method like API resources. So by default, if you are using information like API scopes only, then add in-memory API scope is enough. But if you want to load in-memory API resources also, then you need to register API memory resource method as well in the startup. So, but if you have more APIs to protect, then it is obvious good choice to load from the database. So retrieve the database, we have implement add resource. So this add resource have some five, I believe, five methods where we have to implement them. Okay, so those five methods, how they will execute, when they will execute, we are going to understand in upcoming steps. Okay, so in the core, what I will do, create a class like resource store. Okay, implement I resource store. Okay, so we need to implement, I think around five methods we have to implement. Okay, so see these five methods like find API resource name. So this C method returns collection of API resources. Okay, next method returns collection of API resources only. But what is the difference? First method inputs API resource name as its filter parameter. Second method uses scope names. By using scope name, we have to filter the API resources. Okay. Next thing is return collection of scopes that has parameter like scopes. And next thing is identity resource. So what is this identity resources? Actually, identity resource is not useful in client credentials approach. Okay. It will be useful in uh, implicit flow or the authorization code flow, because identity resource is nothing but those are like clients we have to specify like names, email, phone number. Those are nothing but identity resources. Means this class is for OpenID. Okay, OpenID means those only, nothing but email, name, those clients. Okay, so for our demo, I can simply return empty collection. Okay. So that's enough logic regarding this find and as a scope. And first method also for this demo, it won't execute it. Okay, client credentials. So I will simply return uh, empty collection. Okay, but remaining three methods, we need to load the data. Okay, so this last method is not for the request use. So this method gets executed for the endpoint like is documentation endpoint. Identity resource gives a documentation endpoint that contains JSON response only. So in that JSON response, when the server hits that URL, this method will be executed. I will show with debugger, you can understand more. So what this method means, resources means, it will contains property. If you go to definition, not peak, just to go to definition. Here you can see collection of identity resources, collection of API resources, collection of API scope. So what it means, if you assign them, those values will be loaded into our documentation. So other developers can easily understand what kind of resources are available in our identity server. Okay, for that purpose only, this identity resourcing method is available. For now, let me run new async sources. Okay, what are the properties? I can load API resource, API scope, identity servers. I don't have offline access. Okay, so these values I can load. So what I will do, I need to inject my DB context here as well to load the data. So what I will do, I will copy the code from here, paste it, change the constructor name and import. Okay. Now what I can do, API resources dot to list. Okay, I need to map it to API resources. So what I will do, API resource type. Okay, and I need only name is enough, so I can load name. Okay, just loading the data from the API resource table and mapping it to our identity model API resource. Okay, next thing is API scopes. There also I can do same. So API resource scope I can use and select new and API scope here. For the name, I can explain my scope dot to list async. Okay, that's it. So this information will be loaded into the documentation, which I will show once we run our identity server. Okay, so this is like this is enough. And next thing is need to load the scopes by that need to be filtered by API scope. So what I can do, one thing, please remember, use API scopes are case sensitive. Okay, so please keep that in mind. So now what I will do, where DB API scopes, which all the API scopes data. Okay, so list async. I want to load all the and async. Okay, now where results equal to new API scope of API scopes. This is the result I want to return for this method. Okay, and now for each scope names, name, okay, match API scope equal to DB API scopes where equal to name. Please make sure make them work like a case instance to. Okay, so that is why I'm not using any lower or upper. So first default. So let me select it to API type as well. New API scope type m equal to underscore scope. Okay. So if it matches with the name that is passed by the framework, then let's add it to the result set. Okay. So results dot add matched scope. Okay. And finally return the collection of scopes that are matched with our scope names. Okay. And finally here API resources need to be returned, right? But they must be filtered with scope name. We simply write a join query, okay, between the API resources and API scope. So once we got them, we group them by API scope names and we filter them by scopes. So let's do where DB API resources and scopes equal to Authentication DB context API resource, okay, join. So to which I want to join? I want to join with API's resource scope. Okay. Now API resource key on which I want to join. I want to join by ID and the API resource scope on which I want to join. I want to join by API resource ID. Okay. And finally, final result I want to load is AR comma ARS. Okay. So an anonymous object I am creating. So what I want AR dot name comma ARS dot scope name for to list. Okay. So we will get the joined data. I want to group them. So group result equal to DB API scope group by. So from which I want to group, I want to take name as a key. So from that I want to select. So from that what I can select, create another anonymous object and I can do key dot select. I can select collection of scopes list. To okay. And the key will be, I will use a name property. Okay, now what I can do for each. So let's create a collection as a result of API resources where API result equal to new list of API resources. Okay. And here scope names, name Okay. So this input value I am looping. Now what I will do, our matched API resource, that is we can do like grouped result where any, sorry, where scope dot any so I can use yes here for scope equal to my name. Okay. And also let's select the scope type. Okay. And define the type. API resource type. So we are mainly depend upon only name. So assign name. Okay. Name. So matched API resource scope is there. Result dot, sorry, add matched API resource. Okay. And finally return the result. Okay. Yeah, use a sync here and wait. Okay, so bit long method. So what we are doing, I want ultimately fetch the API resources only, this method also, but depends upon the scope. So what I'm doing, I'm joining API sources and API scopes. Okay, so after coming join results are coming, I am grouping them so that I can have a name that is nothing but API resource name and collection of scopes. And finally looping our scope input collection against the each our results. Then if they match, I am preparing API scope and returning that as a matched API resource. So if that is not empty, we are returning results. So finally what we have did, we are implemented this method, and this method anyway. Find API resources by API scopes. This method won't execute for our demo. Okay. And this method executes, but we are not depends on identity resources. And this method we implemented, this is for documentation. So we are done with the implementing resource store. So what we will do, we will implement in the startup file. Okay. So here there is an extension method like add resource store. Okay. That's it. We are done with the identity server configurations. Our API is successfully registered and everything. So let me run my project. So we don't have any view files, right? So it will like a self-hosted. So let's run it. So server is set up. Okay. So what I will do, I want to show you the debugging. So client store, let's have a debugger here, and resource store, let's have debugger on every method so that we can understand when and what method is executing and when they are executing. Okay. Let me add all methods. Okay. So first I have mentioned, right? Documentation, for documentation loading, these methods get executed, right? So let's test it. So for documentation, there is a default endpoint that is provided by the identity server, that is well-known identity OpenID configuration. Okay, so it is already hitted our IResourceStore. So client is not hitting in this request because it is not a client-based request, right? So, but it needs some resources. Okay, that's why this method is hitting. Say get all resource method, bottom method. This method executes for this URL. Okay, so let's run the continue debugging. Okay, so this is the documentation. See, like what our identity server provides all the brief overview. And one more thing is the API one dot resource scope. So this is my API resource scope stable record. Here is coming. That is because of this API scopes. Okay, so that's all the things. So our server is up and we are able to see our documentation also where our get all resource method also executing. Okay, now I want to test uh, uh, credential client credential authentication from the Postman so that I can fetch JWT access token or not. We can see. Now we are going to see this flow. Like a client will send client ID, client secret, and scopes, and it will return the JWT token. For now, for first testing purpose, what I will do, I will just use Postman. Later on, I will create a separate client application, and from there I can call it HTTP call to get the JWT access token as well. Okay, so this is flow from client to identity server we will do using the Postman. So to save some time, I have already prepared API token access endpoint. So this is this URL I have taken from my this one token endpoint. Okay, that is the same URL I have using here. So I am requesting for the access token. So what I am using form URL encoded from the body. I'm sending client ID and my database value. So this is the database value I have stored. Initially I have shown, right, some dummy data inserted. So that dummy data values I am using here. And client secret, my client secret, and grant type. So this is the default constant value, that is client underscore credentials, grant type value for the client credential. Okay, so let's test our API endpoint. See, when you hit, it is hitted our client store, and if you see, you can receive my client ID. Okay, so let's hit on continue. See, now find API scopes by name. So this is which method? From bottom three, from top also, that is the third method. Scopes executing. Okay, execute. After that method, find identity resource scope by name. From top, fourth one is also executing. And after that, executing second method from the top. See, this method, second, third, fourth methods in the iStore will automatically invoke when a client request comes to the identity server. Okay, please remember that one. See, my request is a valid request. That's why I'm getting my access token. So token type is barrier. So if I copy this, I can view my data as well. So to do that, what I will do, jwt.io website where you can check the encrypted values. So it will hit the resource file. That's okay. Click continue. See here, payload data. Oops. Here you can see my scope. But audience value, I have expected API 1, but it is not coming. So the reason the API resource name is not generating as audience value, here I am not mapping the scopes. So if I map scopes, I hope token will get audience value as the API resource name. So let's try again. Maybe this should fix. So go for it, go for it, go for it, for it, for it. So after executing, copy the token, go to jwt.io and paste our token, continue debugger. See, now we are getting audience API. Okay, so that is the reason we are using the API resources. Okay, so if you want to test, what you can do means you can comment out this whole thing and simply returns API resource like this also works. But at that time we don't have a audience value. Okay, let's test this also. See, this change I am doing it, find API resource by scope name missing. That is nothing but the second method. Okay, so let's run it. Now execute it. Debugger hitting, click on continue. So we got token. That means our request is success without API resources also. But only thing is we don't see this audience value. Okay, let's go here. See, no audience value, right? Okay, so let's revert that change. Or suppose you can check API scopes as well. If you uncommented out these scopes and return empty scopes, then our request will every time it will fail because API scopes is must and should. In spite of scopes are exist in API resource also, our request get rejected. Okay, so to check that one, let's test it. Now our request will be failed always because API resource is mandatory. It should have the scope that our API is sending. So here one more point I have to show, right? So if I hit debugger, if client executed, so client, let's have a debugger here so that client scopes you can see. So if you hover on DB client scopes, it has one scope that is nothing but API read scope. Okay. So if you don't send from here, identity server will searches for the scopes that belongs to this client. Okay. So continue. See, invalid request. And you can see the request failure here as well. Invalid, no scope, and here error also showing. No scopes are found. Okay. So from this we can understand API scopes is mandatory and API resources are optional, but API resources are helpful to for maintaining the audience name. Otherwise, audience name will comes this default one. Means only resources like this will come. Okay. If you add API resources, you will get specific audience name. Okay. So that's it regarding the uh, IClientStore and IResourceStore about the API. Okay. So next I want to create the protected resource. So we all know what is protected resource. Protected resources are nothing but these API resources that is under the production of our identity server. So this yellow box API we want to create. So what I will do, let me create a API that's have protection under the identity server. Okay. So now go here and add a API, new project. Here I have shortcut for ASP.NET Core Web API, or else you can search here. I'm searching ASP.NET Core Web API. So I will name like protected demo API. So it should be protected by the. So let's take .NET 5 project. Okay, create it. So now we have protected API project. Okay. So since by default every project runs under 500, right? So go to properties and log settings. Let's change the port numbers to 6000 series for the protected API. Our identity server will run on 5000. This protected API runs on 6000. Okay. So let's change it. And now I need to configure the JWT authentication for this service. For that, I need to install a what I can say one library, that is JWT barrier, Microsoft JWT barrier library. Let's go to manage packages. Okay, so you can search like not install. Go to browser. The Microsoft ASP.NET Core.jwt barrier. Let's install the stable version. Package, I think installed successfully. Yes, it is installed. Now what I can do, I need to register the authentication service. So for that, services dot add. So this, please make sure this is a protected API I'm writing, not in identity server. Okay. Add JWT, add authentication middleware. Okay. Here I can name like my barrier, that is, this should be the string only for barrier. Okay. Barrier, and add JWT barrier middleware, and I will name same name barrier. Okay. And here you can provide some options. Okay. So first option I want to provide is authority. Authority, I can assign the my identity server domain name. So what is my identity server domain name? 5000. Okay. Next thing is I can set options dot validation parameters. Okay. New token validation parameters. So let's minimize the name. So here what I will do, I will assign the audience, valid audience. So I can give API 1, right? So I'm giving my audience like API 1. So this is the resource name in my database. Okay, API resource name. API resource name. I'm using as a audience. So I am making sure it should be validated perfectly. Validate audience equal to true. For suppose if you are using only API scopes, right? At that time you won't have a valid audience. So what you can do, you can don't assign this property and set this property to false. Okay? We are using only API scopes only. Since I am using API resource and scopes, I'm validating the audience. So audience is nothing but the project that is under the production of API. Okay. So that's all the configuration for JWT. And for authentication enable, on top of authorization, we need to add one more middleware like use authentication middleware. Okay. I think we are good with the configurations. Let's create a endpoint, protected endpoint. Okay. So let me create a new endpoint controller. So API controller, let's create a dummy. Okay, what I will create like test. Okay. So here I will test three kind of scenarios. This is for authorization, how authorization perfectly working with our JWT token or not. Okay. So what I will do, public I action, I will name like case one. Okay. So route is case one and it have normal authorization. Okay. So copy paste these values. So this route is case one. This route is case two. So method name is case two. I want to use policy based authorization. So I will name like policy my client have. So what this means, it is a policy name. So I have created like this name for our understanding. Okay. So please don't create like this. Have a meaningful name. Okay. So what this means? My JWT token. Okay. What I will get that will have that scope to consume this API. Okay. Policy add my scope. Okay. This is my policy name. Means the whatever token I am going to use will be validated because this policy scope what I will register in next step will have in my token. Okay. I want to test failure case file. So for that I will create case 3 and here policy don't have my scope means I don't have this policy based scope means this scope have different this policy will have different scope that I don't have, my client don't have. So if my don't have that, my client don't have that scope means identity server won't put that scope into JWT because identity server only adds the scope that client had. Okay. So here I want to test the failure case means this action method should reject my request. This action second and first should be accepted. Third must be rejected because I don't have that scope. Okay. Okay. Anyway, we won't see this message. Okay. Hi, I have for scope authorization. Sorry, policy authorization. Okay, that is the output I am returning. And here I will return like okay, normal authorization. Okay, so now finally I want to do is I want to add these policies in the startup. So to do that, services dot add authorization. Okay. Okay, I need to register my policies. So option dot add policy. Okay, I can add my two policies here. What is scope I have? API 1.read, right? Okay, this is one policy and this is other policy, which I don't have. Okay, So policy dot require user repeated user policy dot require kind like I can say key like scope and my scope value, that is API one dot read. Okay, now I will add scope that I don't have in the second policy. Okay, I will write like API one only, something like read more, which I don't have scope. Okay, so let's test my endpoints. Okay, let's build both the projects. Okay, so first let's run our identity server. So start without debugging. I want to start my identity server. So identity server is set up. Next I want to run is my protected API. Okay, start without debugging. Swagger failing. Let me change it to use 6000 port. My Swagger failing. I think I'm missing verbs. Okay, let's run again. Okay, my Swagger is successful. Let me test from the. Okay, my protected API endpoint is 6000, right? So I want to consume my protected API from Postman. Okay, so I have endpoints like API slash test slash case one. But for this to use it, I need to have a JWT access token that is delivered from the access token. Sorry, that is delivered from the identity server, right? You can do one way in Postman, two ways. That is normal way is first get the access token. Okay, okay. So token, copy this token and add in address here. In Postman, we have another option that is like in authorization. What you can do means go to OAuth 2.0. Okay, just a moment. Here also you can request the access token endpoint. For that, click on get new access token. So you can give this default name like this only. No need to give anything here. Here you can pass your identity server access token URL and client ID, client secret. This one is optional only, and select grant type and request the token. If everything is valid, this pop-up will invoke a new request and fetches the what I can say JWT token. See, it is valid. That's why here one record is added. Token is added here. See, this is my generated token. Okay. So what you can do here, we have options like either you can use URL or header. What you can say, click header and use token. Okay. Observe headers here. Currently empty, right? When you click on use token, it is automatically populated. Now I have access token. Okay. So let me my access token also I have. I can consume my protected API. So let's hit the send button. See 200 normal authorization. So that is the response rate I have given normal authorization. Now let's consume case 2. Case 2 also will work because that is policy based, right? So what policy it has? It has policy like I have added claim like scope and API one resource. Okay. So generally if I copy this, okay, and go to JWT.io and paste here. Here my scope is I have only API read one. So that means my second case also will get success. See, I have success. second API also working, case 2 URL. But if I access third controller that is decorated with scope read more, which I don't have, you can check in my JWT. So it will get failed. So if I change 3, I will get the 403 forbidden. That says request is legal, means user is authenticated, but the server is refusing respond to it. Unlike 401, authentication make no difference. Okay, so that means authorization is failed. Forbidden request is correct request only, authenticated request only, but there is no authorization to communicate that resource. If I change back to 2, I can get the data, but 3 I won't get because I don't have that scope. Okay, this is how authorization authentication can be applied on our protected API. Okay, so we have created our identity server and we have created our uh, protected API and we tested it from the using Postman as a client. Okay, so let's do it final step, that is like instead of Postman, let's create our own client application. Okay, so that I can consume it from my a client application using HTTP client call. I can consume it. Okay, so for that what I can do, I can create one more project. So now creating client project is nothing but these green boxes, these clients I am creating. Here also I am creating one API as a client application. That API inside controller using HTTP client. We are going to invoke the API call. Okay. So instead of Postman, I am going to create a real-time client application. So right click, add new API, select web API, go next. So I will name like client.demo API. Okay, this is my client API. So I want to target 5.0 .NET. Okay. So here I am going to use HTTP client factory for creating the HTTP client instances. So first thing is let me create a model for the token response. So here we know, right? Token response, access token expiry. To capture them, first let's create a response model in our client API. So create models. Okay, and let me create class like API access token response. Okay, so to save some time, let me copy paste my code snippet for the response model. Okay, so this is my response model. Just import the system.text.json serialization namespace. So what it will do means it will map the API response underscore names. See here, these are not plain properties. There are some underscores. So we can use this JSON property attribute to map them perfectly. Okay, here I want to mention one more property like identity server using 5000 port and our protected API using 6000 port, right? Let me change my client API to 7000 port. Okay, seems like this is my protected API. Okay, I want to change it in client. So change it to 7000. I also did a mistake. I have created model inside of the protected API. So let me move it to my client demo and delete it here. And let me change the namespace for the, okay, that is the mistake I am correcting. So Now in startup, I need to register the domains like identity server domain and also protected API domain into my HTTP client factory. Okay, so to do that, the startup services dot add HTTP. Okay, here I am going to use the name type technique. Okay, through names we can generate the HTTP client instance. Okay, first I will name like identity server. Okay, options. We need to register base domain of our identity server. Okay, so base address equal to okay, that is for my identity server. I have registered with HTTP client. So this is name type client. There are 4 different types of client. If you want, you can check my blogs. I have also write blogs. In that blogs, I have explained each type of technique. If you want, you can check my blog. The link to the blog will be available in my under the video description. You can check over there. Okay, services dot HTTP client, and I will name like protected API. So these names are meaningful to our application so that these names will be used in generating the HTTP client in the controllers. Okay, so options dot base address equal to copy this, and we know our protected API port is 6000. Okay, so that's it. So now let's create our demo controller in our client. So I will create like one controller, API controller. I will name it like demo. Okay, this demo will have a action method that will going to consume our protected API. First, it will communicate with our protected API. Sorry, first it will communicate with our identity server and fetches the JW token and uses that JW token and fetches the uh, API response. Okay. Okay. So let's inject the HTTP client factory. Okay. Okay. So public get protected API. Okay. So here first I want to invoke the identity, right? So what I will do here, let's create access token response. Okay, and get JWT token. Okay, so here what we can do means let's prepare a credentials for dictionary like credentials new dictionary. Okay, string, and here we are going to pass two values. Okay, or credentials, client ID, client secret. Okay, so those values like this one. So copy from here. Okay, client ID client name. Okay, client secret. Sorry, client secret, client secret. Okay, and also we need to send the grant type as well. So for that, I can use type client credentials. Okay, now request message equal to HTTP request message and method dot post. And here already origin is registered here, right? So remaining path for access token, what is the remaining path? Is slash dot connect, right? I can use them here. Okay, and to the request message content equal to new form URL encoded content. Okay, and I can pass key value pair credentials. Key value pair credentials. Okay, let's create the instance of where HTTP client instance from the HTTP client factory. Here we need to pass the name of the HTTP client registered. That is identity server I want instance, right? So it will create. And now HTTP client dot send async. I can pass request message object. Okay. So it should be awaited response. Okay. And it should be async task. Okay. So if response dot is success status code or else return empty response or else where data equal to await response dot content dot read as a string async. Okay, and now we can return JSON serializer dot reserialize access token response data. Okay, so what we are doing, we are preparing client credentials using request message object. We are preparing a type and URL and adding our client credentials using as a form encoded URL content, and finally creating the HTTP client instance from the HTTP client factory using the name that we have registered in the startup. Okay, and getting the response. Okay, now here we need to fetch the, should be also async await. This is our action method, right? Okay, where token response equal to get JWT token. So once token is get, we need to invoke our protected API. We can use some of these things like copy and our protected API is get method. and our protected API URL is like API/test. Since we want to test the successful API, either case 1 or case 2, I can call. Okay. And the request message dot headers dot add values. Okay. I can say like authorization. Okay. If you have any doubt, it will give intelligence or copy from here. I need to pass as a header, right? Sorry. Only key. And to use barrier token, it should be barrier space token. You can observe here as well. Barrier space token. Same way, we need to frame and pass it here. So what I will do, the token response, I will get token type. We awaited token type space token response access token. Okay. So I have added authorization header also. So what I will do, I will copy all these things. Okay. Here is not identity server. Here is protected API instance I want. So I need to pass protected API instance. Okay. So if response dot success, I will return, right? Response dot content dot. Anyway, it is string only returns, right? My protected API controller. If you go, it is returning string data only, right? So no type conversion. I will simply return it. Okay. Okay. Or else I will return fail. Okay, that's it. My client is done. What I'm doing, I'm invoking token, and token is adding as a header for the protected API. Right. Now let's run all the 3 applications and test. Okay. So first build all our applications. Okay. First let me run our identity server. Okay. So let me run without debugger. Okay. It is up. Next thing is let me run my protected API, that is protected demo API. So let me run without debugging. Okay, that is also running. Now let's run my client application. So that is client API demo. So here select to use client demo so that it can use 7000. Okay. So start without debugging. Yeah. So it is really okay, nothing, no decoration. So route is like get protected API, okay, and HTTP get, okay, stop and run again my client application. Okay, now test it from the Swagger itself. See, I'm I have got normal authorization. See, if you test it from here, you will get same response. Case 1, if you put case 1, you will get normal authorization. Same response I have got here. So that's it. We have successfully implemented our identity server, protected API, and client application with the client credentials flow. Okay. I hope this video has delivered some useful information to you all. If you like, please support me by subscribing to my channel. We will meet you again with new videos. Until then, signing off.